You can teach an old dog new tricks. All right, hold on, guys. So very diverse menu of loan programs. So Fannie Freddie, non-QM products, you guys will probably be familiar with debt service coverage ratio. We have ground up construction products. We have short-term bridge. I don't know if you guys can see my teams. Let's try and get rid of that. Bridge loans for fix and flip, fix and hold. We've got HELOCs, second lien HELOCs for primary residence only. We've got first lien HELOCs for rental properties, and of course, second home if that's your need. What am I forgetting? We have commercial products that obviously applies to commercial properties, but it can also apply to residential properties in a blanket loan way. Cross collateralization is what that's called. In addition to that, I think another real value add, and really the reason that you guys are here today, is the education, the free education that we provide. I'm always saying that real estate investing just on its own merit, hugely intensive, the learning curve. The different strategies that could be applied. I mean, the range is huge. And depending on which one you're interested in, long-term, long-term rental, single-family residence, short-term, 2 to 4, whatever it is, just those individual strategies, there's so much information out there, so much to learn, so much to absorb. The financing element of real estate, you need that leverage or other people's money to extend or to greatly enhance the rate of return, right? What happens when we don't have leverage? The ROI is going to be diminished significantly. So you really need to understand, I think, what's going on in the black box of underwriting guidelines. So the education, I think, is really key. Those two elements, the diversity of loan product and then the education, I would say, are the real value adds of Ridge. And today, we're going to get into some of that education. So that's kind of who we are in a nutshell, getting back on track. So I don't know how often we're going to be doing these, but I'm excited to get back in the mix of this and see you guys monthly, maybe, is kind of what I'm thinking. And we're starting with the new series, Real Estate Rules. I've chosen a few of what we've been posting on social media. If you guys see any of those little snippets that you want to dig into deeper, let us know, please. I really want to hear from you and what it is that you guys want from our standpoint, what you want to hear, what you want to know. So please make sure that you email info@ridgelendinggroup.com and tell us what intel you're most interested in hearing about. Okay, so let's get into this. I am going to, let me just look and see if I've got any messages from you guys, if I'm getting everything right. Q&A, chat's been disabled. Okay, I've already seen those. Okay, so let's just go, Caeli. I'm going to turn off my video. I've got some notes here. I'm going to be reading for myself, so I don't want you guys to think I'm just not focused on you. I'm going to be reading my notes, and then I will turn it back on. So I'm thinking about 30 minutes to go through this slide deck in terms of the different, I think there's 5 I chose for the rules, and then after that, I'll zip through these, and after that, we can do a Q&A. So write down your questions. I won't be looking at, because I'm doing this by myself, I won't be looking at the questions as they come out. So if something comes up that I've said that triggers a question or comment or whatever, again, I want this to be collaborative, so please feel free to, chime in. But after I go through the slide deck and give you my thoughts, we'll do a Q&A, okay? For maybe 30 minutes. Let's see how quickly I can get through this. All right, so agenda. This is kind of real quick fluff stuff. We've got this first one. So as I just described, you guys, I'm trying to pick relevant topics about investing or lending that I think are going to be most valuable to our clients and listeners. Simple as that. So please feel free to join us. This is being recorded, as you just saw a minute ago. It'll be published post live, I think, probably by tomorrow afternoon. So if you wanted to go back and re-listen to anything, or for anybody that didn't get to make it live, you'll get to have that on our YouTube channel, Ridge Lending Group. Okay, new series, talked about that. Let's just start with rule number 1. So these, I've got 5 rules here. So let's talk about maintenance. Maintenance as a must, obviously. And it sounds kind of funny. And some of these, depending on your level of experience as an investor, if you've been doing this for a while or if you're brand new to it, some of it may seem obvious. but you may be surprised to learn that as obvious as some of these rules seem, uh, I find that on a regular basis, not so much. Let me explain. So there are two vantage points here. The first being upon purchase when we talk about maintenance of our real estate investment properties. And I don't think I mentioned real quickly, you guys, my vantage or my lens in this, I am a real estate investor. I don't think I said that. So for those of you that do not know me, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've held many properties all over the United States. So I'm able to give you from my perspective, my experiences, good and bad, how I have navigated what I consider a battleship in a creek, if that paints a picture of real estate investing. So first being on the maintenance, two vantage points. The first is purchase. And unless it's a burr or flip, right, that the property is going to need, you know it's going to need all that work in advance, it better be or look rent ready when we're talking about the maintenance and the upkeep of the property, okay? You're going to find varying degrees, I think, and an opinion of this, but what is rent ready? My idea of rent ready is a standard baseline, of course, right? And beyond just being habitable, in addition to that, I'd say no hazard issues, exposed wiring, outlets without covering, holes in walls. I mean, right, the obvious stuff, broken windows, locks, flooring that's pulling, et cetera, et cetera. For several reasons, I want to see a little bit extra in addition to that. The attention to detail is big, and I think it's missed quite often from ourselves and even property management if you are outsourcing that. If you are not an attention to detail person, I would make sure that your property manager is. So that might be part of the vetting that you would do within finding the right property manager for any property. But I'm talking about things that can be very inexpensive that go a long way at attracting the tenant that you want in your property. I've had experiences over the years where bad property management or I tried to do something myself and the tenant just trashed the place and it really affects the return. The amount of cost that it's going to take to get it rent ready again when that individual or individuals leave is significant. If you've owned rental property, you know what I'm talking about. So let's talk about specific things, attention to detail. And these things are going to also keep the right tenant. Okay. Least of all, showing the tenant what the expectation on how we kind of want our property or our home to be maintained. And I have those conversations, by the way, with potential tenants, even through the property management to say, you know, here's kind of the expectation. This is my investment. I don't have any problems in kind of saying, this is an investment of mine. I want to keep it in a certain condition. Please have that respect. I don't think that there's any problem in doing that. So I've had those conversations, and for the most part, they've actually served me, I feel like. Okay, so hardware. Okay, just little things, inexpensive little things that can actually kind of make the property look a little bit more up to date. If it's an older property, et cetera, bathroom and kitchen hardware, you can find that shit cheap, nice looking, and it really updates older homes. Lighting fixtures, that's the same scenario there. Baseboards on the property, if they're just cleaned and or freshly painted, that's probably enough. The other thing that I like to do is that if you can get a tenant that will sign at least a 2-year lease, maybe more, 2+ year lease, I'll give them the option to select up to 2 paint colors that they get to choose in the different rooms, like an accent, a main, and an accent. That usually is something that they really like. Not all property managers offer that kind of thing. Then moving into the exterior, the curb appeal, you guys, is a big deal, I think. I know that for me, curb appeal is big personally. Um, I think it's maybe even more than the inside in some cases, at least to attract the tenants to look at the property for rent. Again, easy, inexpensive things you can do to make the home present well. Flowers in the walkway, just little things like that. Just in front of the home, pop a color, something, well-maintained yard. Okay, I mean these things seem obvious, but I'm on the other end of constantly looking at appraisals. You would be surprised at how often it does not look appealing inside and out. Solar powered lighting leading up to the home, very inexpensive and can look really cool. There's lots of cool new inexpensive solar powered lighting that up the walkway or around the front of the home that can light up the foliage and stuff. It looks really cool. Anyway, my point is look for the detail. So the next piece here is not just about the straight purchase, right? When you're buying the property, let's talk about once the tenant vacates, right? Tenant turnover. Going back to the property management and vetting the trust that you put into the property management, I don't know that there's anything more important in my mind than the right property manager in a successful real estate venture. I've talked to, I don't know, countless people about this. And I think that everybody agrees that, if let's just say that your objective is cash flow, I feel like cash flow is probably equally as important to the right property manager. I've had experiences over my career as an investor that have taught me some valuable lessons where, the property looked amazing on paper, right? The rate of return was incredible. Everything was going to be perfect. And I rushed the property management and didn't take my time and vetting that company. And it was a shit show. It was a complete nightmare. So I would say that as it relates specifically to maintenance, that's part of the vetting. You've got to find the right property manager. If you're doing it yourself, fine. Okay. That's probably going to be short term. If I had to guess, you're probably not going to be property manager long term. If you're doing it initially, I think that's actually fantastic. Good for you. It's going to give you a lot of experience that you'll be able to use when you do go out there and replace with a property management team. But ensure that here's a couple things that I would ask a property manager. I mean, there's a whole list, and we have one on our community and website that you can access. It's by no means complete, but it's a nice, nice coupling of probably 20 different things that if you're vetting property management, these are some of the questions that I want to have answers to. As it relates to this, you're going to want to see that the property manager is doing at least annual, semi-annual inspections, right? That's in the contract with your tenant that they know that the property manager is going to, given the appropriate amount of notice, right? But they're going to go and internally inspect the property. They're going to open the doors and look inside. And then at least once a month, they're looking at the exterior, right? They're doing their drive-bys. I would say both of those things are going to be really important to vetting that property manager, making sure that it's in the contract that they have the ability to at least once a year enter that property, given notice, and then doing drive-bys throughout the month. Okay, so that's maintenance. Important, important, important in attracting the right tenant, keeping the tenant, and then, like I said before, setting that expectation, right? If it looks like a shitbox to begin with, I think it's more likely that the tenant is going to be less concerned with keeping it nice. Okay. Number two, understanding the market and neighborhood before you invest. Okay, obviously we want to, and I think that a lot of investors miss this. I don't think that they put enough time and energy and research into the area and the market that they're going to be purchasing, and maybe they just start in their backyard. That's fine. Definitely, I'm going to be the proponent to ensure that you are diversifying the different markets. I made some mistakes early on in putting too many eggs in one basket, aka market. So definitely, I mean, certainly you can start with a specific area that you're most interested in, 2, 3, 4 properties, maybe even more. But make sure that once you've got your sea legs, if you're a newer investor, make sure that you're looking outside of a particular area and that you've got a diversification in market. I'll give you an example. So Florida, I was heavily invested in Florida. This was pre 08, 09. And of all the properties that we had at that time, 42 at the height, Florida took a beating. And because we were so saturated in Florida, we got our asses kicked, right? So anyway, diversification in market is going to be important. Now, the neighborhoods and the job market, those things are going to be very, very important to make sure that you've got the right tenant pool. Do you know what kind of tenant that you're interested in? Let me see if I can share another screen. I've got something that I want to show you guys. The first place that you'd want to look when you're doing this research, obviously, Dear Google is going to be the first place most of us go, and you'll be able to find most of the information that you need this way if you dig enough. Your property management should also have a lot of this data, but your lender Ridge Lending can also support in this way. So we have access to county records through our escrow relationships. So if you guys have a property in particular, let's just say there's a property address, it'll be, I don't think we can search in just area. You'll have to have an address. But if you were to give us that, we can pull property profiles. And within these profiles, here, I took a snippet, you guys. Let me see if I can bring that up on screen. Hang tight. I think it's right here. Yeah. So this is, I'm hoping, let me see if someone will tell me if you can see this, because it'll be stupid if you can't. Can you guys see the little snippet? I'll come back to you, Jag. Do you guys see this little snippet here that just shows you there's check boxes next to, yes, thank you, Joel. Whoops. Let's get that back. Sorry, you guys. So you can see the different data departments we can pull from. Okay, the property details are going to be things like the APN number, the legal description, the how the county is zoning it, single family 2 to 4, the taxes, property taxes. You can pull comps based on county records, and we can customize this to say we want the comps to be within a mile of the subject property. We want the sale or the date of the comp to be within 6 months, the bedroom bathroom count to be within 1 each, right? We can customize. You can see the customize button there. The street map, I don't know how useful that's going to be for you. Assessor's map, likewise, I don't know that you're really going to need that. Transaction history is going to give you when it was purchased, right? It'll go back, I think, 10, 15 years, who all the owners have been and what they paid for the property. In addition to the transaction history, you're also going to get the mortgage history, what liens were on there last and when. Now that might be useful if you're trying to negotiate a lower price. Here's an example. Let's say that it's listed for $250. Okay, property's listed for $250. If you have access to this data, you'll know that whomever is selling this property purchased it or they refinanced it in the last 12 months, and the loan on that was only for 100,000, right? So that'll tell you that the seller has room to negotiate versus if they're selling it for 250 and they just got a loan 6 months ago for 240, right? There's not going to be that margin for error. There won't be that room necessarily to negotiate. Now, whether your negotiation skills are up to par and you can get that done, I don't know that yet. But anyway, that's what transaction history is. Local schools. And I have something else that I'll share in just a second. I'll bring up an example property profile. Businesses, neighborhoods, demographic, and crime. Okay, so there's quite a bit that you can ascertain from one of these reports if you're having a hard time getting it all on your own. So let me share that screen really quickly. I don't need that anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to assume that this is working now. So this is what a property profile is. Okay. I'm gonna pass by the transaction history, and I just want to show you guys the demographic and schools and stuff. So here are the schools that are within, they'll tell you how far it is from the subject property that we're searching for. Information here, right? Schools. Let's look at local businesses. Now, I like this because it gives you the name, the address, and the phone number. If you're really going to be creative with your investment property and you want to support your property management and how it might be marketed and some of the little attention to detail that you want to provide for your tenant, as an example, and then looking through these local business lists and having like a one sheet on move-in day, okay? And some property managers already do this. They should be doing this anyway, where you just have the basic stuff, like if they're ones responsible for their water or their electric or whatever, there should be a sheet on there that gives them all of that contact information to set all that up and transfer it into their name. But otherwise, little things like this. Hey, here, if they're new to the area, here are some of the places that are close by for eating. Okay, banks. That kind of stuff is probably not going to be on those little cheat sheets that the property manager should be providing to your tenants upon moving in. Hospitals probably be on that list from property management, you would assume. But you guys get my point, right? Local businesses, and there's all the information that you need there to help provide. The other thing that's kind of cool about this that you could do is you could come up with, let's see, let me think if I can find a good example of this. So, okay, personal services here, we've got this here. So you could go by, or you could call this personal training Allison Smith person and say, hey, listen, I am a landlord in your area and I'm renting out my property and I want to maybe give them my new tenant a little freebie, right? Would you be willing to offer, one free training session kind of thing, right? Some little things like that. Remember, you guys, attention to detail. I do not believe that most landlords go to the trouble of really taking the time to do this. In fact, I would say that it's a fraction of a percent of landlords that will take the time to do what I'm describing here. And as a result, what do you think that that's going to translate into for the tenant satisfaction? It can mean the difference between keeping a tenant and for 3 or 4 years or longer, which is huge if you don't want those turnover costs, which can be expensive. But also, I think that it will kind of soften the blow if you're increasing your rents annually, which you should be at even a very modest amount of 3%, 2, 3, 4% per year. It depends on the market, of course. But giving some of these little niceties and these little extras, in addition to keeping and having that retention of tenant, if you are going to intent on increasing rents, and I would set that expectation up front, little things like this, I think, make it a little bit more palatable. Okay. I don't know how to turn off my freaking team. Sorry, you guys. Okay, so this is the other thing I want to share with you. Now, this is probably the meat of this. What time do I have? Okay, I got to start going a little bit faster. The demographics. This is where you're going to get a lot of good information. Okay, you've got household, you've got the count in the area, the size. Let's look at housing. Median mortgage payments. Okay, home values, the amounts, the percentages, et cetera, owner occupied. Okay, then we've got rent, median, based on age of the home. Education, what's your education pool of the tenant? Are they college educated? Do you want college educated? Right? Blue collar, white collar, what kind of tenant are you looking for? So this will be useful information, workforce, et cetera. And then of course you got your crime. This is something that I would be looking at. I think you should be looking at it if you're not already doing that search. So this data is available. We have obviously access to what these are called, like I said, as a property profile. So let us know if we can facilitate or be useful in getting you some of that stuff. But understanding the neighborhood. The point of this slide is know where you're investing. And I would go as far as to say you want to be getting all of that data and crunching the numbers. If you guys want to do some one-on-one with me about a specific property, you can schedule that with Vana, info@ridgelendinggroup.com, and we'll go into deeper dives on the property profile and what does all of that information mean and how does it translate into, what is your tenant going to look like and how is this property going to perform short and long term. Okay, let's move on. Number 3. Okay, location. It's similar to market and neighborhoods, et cetera, but in this case, I want to talk about our different strategies and growth and return. So location, generally speaking, well, let me back up. So knowing what your primary core strategy is it cash flow? Is it appreciation? Is it just the single family long-term renter? What is that core philosophy? And knowing that, I want to go back to my talking point of diversification. I think it's very, very important, based on my own personal experiences, mostly my failures, to have some strong diversification. It's perfectly fine to have that core. For those single family long-term renter investors, great. But you're going to want to, at some point, to layer in a higher appreciation market property, perhaps even that short-term rental, perhaps a 2 to 4. And how that applies to the location, let's focus on the cash flow versus the appreciation. Most long-term renters of single-family residence reject the idea of appreciation. They think that it's just gravy, and that's fine, okay? But I feel like that's a little short-sighted, Because the truth of the matter is, you guys, for those of you that aren't interested in appreciation, I will just share that the most substantial wealth that you're going to see through real estate is probably going to be on the appreciation side if you're comparing that to just long-term single families that have leverage on it. Okay. Most of the time, the long term, and I know it's market dependent, okay, but most of the time, the national average of cash flow for a single family residence, long-term renter currently is about I'm going to call it 270. That's the average based on, what kind of rents are going to be gained, what the taxes, what the insurance is in that area, et cetera. So if you can imagine, if you've got 10 of those, right? You're making on average 270, or excuse me, 2,700 a month. You're not lighting any fires there. So appreciation, I would not reject appreciation. And the point of this slide is that generally speaking, there's exceptions to all the rules, okay? But the higher the cash flow, the area, the lower the appreciation, and vice versa. The higher the cash flow, the lower the appreciation. It's going to be really rare that you're going to find both high-end cash flow and high-end appreciation in the same market, especially for a long-term rental. Short-term rental, maybe you can find a good mix of both. My general rule of thumb that I like, if just kind of staying on that more conservative basis, single family long-term rental versus, right, that's really where you are, is the highest possible cash flow. I like a 70-30, maybe an 80-20 mix of that, where the biggest part of your real estate portfolio is going to be for that highest cash flow. I would then consider layering in 20 or 30% of my properties for the higher appreciation. I promise you, in the big picture for long-term growth, that is going to be hugely advantageous. And the reason for that, if you guys haven't already drawn this conclusion, is going to be the cash out refinances. If the property is in a high appreciating area in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, what are you going to be able to do with that equity that you've earned via the appreciation? Cash out refi. Borrowed funds are non-taxable. And what are those funds going to do for you? It's going to propel you into acquiring more property. So location matters. And I'm not saying that the higher appreciating property shouldn't cash flow. It still needs to cash flow, but you should be okay with taking less cash flow, right? Even if it's $50 a month, whatever it is, as long as you've got someone else making that mortgage payment and a little cushion there, and you've got the right property manager, okay, so you don't have vacancies, et cetera, or you minimize that as much as possible, you should be okay with taking less cash flow in gaining high appreciation. On this theme too, my time is good. And this theme too, let me also offer that generally speaking, the Sunbelt states are the ones that you're going to find the outer edges of the United States is where you're going to find the highest appreciation generally. Landlocked is usually going to be where you find the highest cash flow. If you're going to be in the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast, those areas are not going to do well, at least in my experience from what I've seen. Feel free to justify why this might not be true. Those areas are not going to do well for long-term rental. They're going to need to be short-term rental. They're outpriced for any kind of long-term rental to cash flow. You're going to need to make those short-term rentals. But the appreciation should be good. Do your homework. Okay, is there anything else on this that I wanted to say? I don't think so. Let's move on. Okay. Inspections. Here's another one I'm constantly shocked to discover investors don't do as a religion. Without exception, I would never, ever buy a home without an inspection. Okay. That said, I want to make sure that I share the following. The inspector's job, you guys, his or her job is to find things wrong with the property. Do not do yourself a disservice and talk yourself out of a good opportunity because you have some outlandish expectation that every item point on an inspection report is cause for pushback and asking the seller to fix or replace or repair, because that's not going to happen. Okay, what you're looking for are the non-negotiables: roof, foundation, Obviously electrical, plumbing, you guys know, dry rot, that kind of stuff is what you're going to be looking for in the inspection. Now, if you decide you don't get an inspection, and this happens, and I'm going to tell you something, you want to do this prior to, you need to be looking at your contracts, okay? You want to be getting the inspection right out the gate. If your contract has contingencies, contingency, for those that may not have heard that term before, is just within the contract, you've got a certain number of days to perform as the buyer. And as it relates to the property condition, that would include the inspection. The appraisal is not the same thing as an inspection. And the appraiser, while might identify some issues and cost to cure that have to do more with safety issues, the appraiser is not going to be looking at the home the way an inspector would be. So if you don't get your inspection until after contingency, guess what? You're probably, and there's an issue, you're going to lose your earnest money probably. Okay. And depending on what that number is, what if it's $5,000? Right? Who wants to just eat $5,000 because you didn't go and get an inspection in enough time? So make sure that and the other thing that happens too is that, and this is maybe a little bit selfish, from a lending perspective, we don't want to go through all of the work, and I promise you it is significant to get through the appraisal and the disclosures and submitting loans, et cetera, to have you do an inspection after that and say, oh, sorry, I don't want this property anymore. Whether you have contingency or not, you're going to piss off your lender. Don't do that. Get the inspection in advance, please. It's important for you, for your lending relationship. And let's take this to its conclusion. Forget about a few $1,000s in an earnest money. God forbid you get so far into this thing that you closed on a loan and you didn't get an inspection and you find something wrong. There are stories like this, believe it or not. I mean, some of you are probably thinking, what the F? Who would do that? But it happens. So I thought it was relevant to mention. But yeah, what happens if you've got some massive foundation issue or something that would come up after you are now officially the owner? That is tens of thousands of dollars or more. Okay, so I think you get my point. Inspection, do not get into a property. I don't care who's selling it to you, get an inspection. You know, it to nobody's fault. The seller may not even know. Okay, get an inspection. Okay, last but not least, I'll take a minute through this and then that should give us enough time for Q&A. So knowing your budget, right? And getting pre-approved. You guys didn't think I was going to get through all of this without giving a plug for the lending, did you? So this is obviously very, very important. And in fact, more often than not, you guys are going to find yourselves not even, getting roadblocked, not even be able to look at inventory, turnkeys or what have you, agents, et cetera. They're not even going to give you the time of day unless you have a pre-approval. So you need to get that done first. And for a variety of reasons, obviously having access to see what's out there and available other than just, looking online yourself. The pre-approval process sucks. Okay. Most people, it's just not their favorite. You guys have probably heard the joke, vials of blood and DNA samples, right? You guys have heard that one. It's one of my favorites. I say it to break the ice, but sometimes it feels that way. If any of you were investing pre the crash of 08, 09, we could fog mirrors and get loans. Okay. Now, Dodd-Frank made some necessary changes to the financial sector, specifically the mortgage side of that. And it requires a lot more skin in the game from you to get a mortgage, right? I feel like they kind of are overreaching on the non-owner occupied side, but I won't get on that soapbox. Pre-approval. So apply, get in your documents, right? Depending on what kind of loan product you're going to be going after. And I wouldn't, if you guys think your debt service coverage ratio only, unless you know for sure, and I'll ask fact-finding questions to make sure you really know this, do not play yourself out of Fannie Freddie if you still have those golden tickets left. You may think or have been told from another institution that you can't qualify because they have an overlay that is not giving you add backs for depreciation. Perhaps they're saying, well, you don't have 2 years history of Schedule E, so we're not going to give you any rental income for the 8 rental properties that you own. Those are overlays, okay? So don't just assume that if somebody else told you that you can't qualify Fannie Freddie because of a debt-to-income ratio issue, that's automatically the case. Chances are it isn't, and there's other nuance there that we'll get into another time. But understanding what you're pre-approved for. The other important part about this is that there may be things that come up in the pre-approval process that you weren't even aware of. What if there was a collection on your credit report that you had no idea, and it took your 760 credit score, and now you're at 680, right? Your interest rate's obviously going to be affected. And the collection was because it was you were the one on the PG&E bill for the rental property that you have, and the bill went to the subject property and not to your home. You didn't see it. It was a total miss, and it screwed it up. And right, so dumb things like that can happen. I see it all the time. So in addition to making sure you understand what your buying power is, getting an advance look at any issues that may be in play that have come up that you weren't aware of, and then obviously having the backing to go to the turnkey or the agents to say, yeah, I'm pre-approved for this, that, and the other thing, right? You'll be able to show them that proof of pre-approval and be able to get access to the properties that you're interested in. What else can I tell you about this? I think I'm going to save any of the real specifics about the financing and knowing what your budget is, et cetera, because I think that's I'm going to spend one of the next ones that we do deep dive on some of this, and how to quantify what your budget is today versus what it might be next year and in 5 years based on what you guys want to see as a result from the investing, right? If you say that I want to be able to net $3,000 net, right, after the hard expenses, maybe not including vacancy or maintenance, but I want to net $3,000 in 5 years. Your budget today and what that will be in 5 years are going to be very different things, right? Your qualifications are going to change significantly in that amount of time based on variables that you won't know to look for. So we'll spend some time getting down and dirty on that. But for now, just understanding that you want to get pre-approved first, get with Ridge, ideally, whoever you're working with, get your pre-approval and have some high-level conversations with me one-on-one about the education specific to your qualifications, your goals, and then knowing how to optimize your qualifications. I'll leave with that and then open up for Q&A. Understanding how to maximize or optimize your qualifications, you guys, long term, I think is probably at the top of the value adds that we provide. It's in the education realm of what I started 30, 40 minutes talking about. It's not obvious stuff, and it's not dear Google stuff. You're not going to be able to, let me turn my camera back on. You're not going to be able to figure out how your qualifications are going to change and evolve over time. And then most importantly, how a lender is going to look at that and how to optimize it. You're not going to know what the add backs on a Schedule E are to make sure that the gain or the loss from that calculation is going to be supportive of your debt to income ratio in the following year. So real important about that pre-approval and then that ongoing conversation with your lender that will help support those conversations and your knowledge. Not that you need to be experts, that's what we're for, but at least to get a look under the hood. Okay, let's see what we got here, and then we'll get into Q&A. We have some new promos. Avery's not here, so I can't tell you what these are. We'll be posting about them, so you'll see those. And then finally, ta-da! Let's go into questions, you guys. I'm not going to stop share because I'm going to put this up for you. But let me get into, let's see if I can figure this out. I'll move this. Okay. You guys know how to reach us. I'm going to take this off so that I can see any of you. So email, there's our website, there's our phone number, 855-74-RIDGE. If that's easier to remember, 855-74-RIDGE is where you can call us, email us, check out our website. Boom. Okay. Let's take the rest of our time here. If anyone feels like turning on their camera, please feel free to do that. I'd love to see your faces. And let's look at our questions. Let's start with Miss Jag. How are you, JC? Checklist properties for the little details you want to see to make it appealing. No, I don't, but I will make myself a note to do that. It would be easy enough that I can put something together and we'll couple it with the property management checklist. The property management checklist is for sure on the community. If you guys are not part of our community, go to our website, join the community. It's free, you guys, it's free. And there's a lot of interaction between other investors. We'll put out our marketing stuff that asks questions to drill into conversation, et cetera. So, but in the community is the property management checklist. Jag, I will checklist for curb appeal. I'll just put curb appeal. And I'll post that and we'll probably put it on social too. Was Florida an issue for you because property values dropped or rentals dropped? Do you feel it would have worked out had you held the properties till today? Well, okay. This is an interesting conversation. So 0809, okay, the crash that everybody always hears me talking about. If you're too young to remember that, this was a total implosion of housing and lending simultaneously. I hear people talk about that they predicted this or they knew, and I'm calling bullshit. Okay. If someone's telling me that they knew that both of those things were going to happen at the same time, if they knew that lending, okay, that lending was going to have some issues, fine. If they knew that housing was going to have some issues, okay. But that both of those things would happen to the degree that they happened at the same time, I don't think so. And if somebody can argue that, I want to know. Let's have a conversation. The point is that prior to 0809, the market cycle was all about appreciation. Of the 42 properties that I held at the height, I don't think one of them cash flowed, you guys, to varying degrees, right? Maybe $50, maybe break even, a few $100. Some of them were even more significant in loss that I had to feed. But the appreciation was so insane that we were doing very well. Okay. I mean, maybe we got a little bit greedy, some would say. In any case, I don't see a repeat of that, Jag, to your question. I'll give you the big example. So we had a property and we were able to do double escrows back then. So we would buy new construction on a 6-month arm. Okay. And we would purchase it at, 800,000, whatever it was. I'd be able to turn around and sell that property in 6 months for $100,000 gain. Okay. So when I say we did well, we did really well. When everything dropped or crashed, it went bad fast. And I had a property that was valued at, I think, 1.15 million. I couldn't short sale that son of a bitch for 350,000. The banks it was just an absolute, what show. So as a result of that, we were stuck with 6-month arms in that one example that we're adjusting. And the problem is that I was in lending, right? And my ability to get financing for myself, let alone my clients, went from unlimited to 0, right? You could have unlimited finance properties. There was no 10 golden ticket rule. It went from unlimited to 4. You could not have more than 4 finance properties to get any kind of financing. And anyway, long story short, lesson learned. If I had been better diversified in that case, in that way, I would have been able to weather that storm a lot more effectively. Okay, let me move on. How can retail investors get access to this information? Justin, if you want to unmute yourself, I'm not sure I understand the question, sir. Yeah, let me know. Michael, Caeli, question for the end of the presentation. Over time, how do you convert that appreciation, especially in the retirement years? You're going to do a cash out refi, Michael. And if you want to take yourself on mute, anybody wants to take yourself on mute, we can have a conversation. As appreciation gains, you're going to do cash out refinances. Now, up until about 4 months ago, we had second lien HELOCs for non-owner occupied. We have suspended that for reasons I'm not going to get into right now. If you want to hear that, we'll talk about it later. But as the tides turn, and I think what we'll do is we'll close with interest rates, because I know everybody wants to know about the Fed is meeting today. If you didn't know that, they had started yesterday. In about an hour and 15 minutes, they're going to announce what happens to that Fed fund rate. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But my point is that the tides are turning a little bit. Interest rates are going to be coming back down. The purse strings are going to be opening up a little bit. So the access to second lien HELOCs on investment might be more available. I don't know exactly when. You're going to have a real hard time finding those today. Real hard time. If you can find them, share them with us in the community, please. We're not doing them anymore. So there's that. Otherwise, just a straight cash out refinance. Michael, to your question, cash out refi on a conventional, most products on a cash out refinance property, investment property are going to be limited to 75% loan to value. Whatever the appraised value comes in at, 75%. If there's a loan on it existing, you're going to obviously pay that off. The difference between what you owe and what the new loan amount is the cash that you're going to get back. Obviously, there's closing costs, so account for that. Borrowed funds are non-taxable. Take that money and go deploy it. You want to be careful about the timing, especially if it's not a HELOC. The HELOC is nice because you're never going to pay interest on funds that you're not using. So versus a straight cash out refinance, you're going to get all the cash at once, right? 100 grand, 50 grand, whatever the number is. And that interest accrual starts immediately. So you want to have a plan or the replacement properties, or at least the area or the turnkey that you want to work with in mind, or the conversation started, maybe even before you actually get the cash, right? You don't want to be paying all that interest until it's deployed, ready to be deployed to earn the return. Okay, Jag, how do you find a really good inspector? Google it. Google, look for the ratings, look for the reviews all over the place. They often miss major. Yeah, I would check in the community, please. It's going to be market specific, obviously, Jag. You're not going to find a national that I know about. If there's a national property inspector group, please share with us. I'm not aware of one, but Google is going to be a good source for that. What about DSCR? Still need pre-approval? This is from my friend Jag. Thanks for the contribution, Jag. Yes, you still need a pre-approval for DSCR. What we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for credit, to see where your credit level is, because that's going to impact your interest rate. And then we want to see some liquidity. Now, liquidity meaning your down payment, right? Your down payment and the reserve requirement, the closing costs, et cetera. Those funds don't have to be seasoned. I don't care where they come from, but I need a bank statement, a recent bank statement that shows your 20 or 25% down plus closing costs plus the reserves. So those two things is what we need to quantify for DSCR, mostly. Okay. Thank you, Narcy. Mr. Hightower, what would you consider as an exceptional negotiation strategy? Let's talk about this, Josh. I think that's too much of a rabbit hole for this conversation. Text me or email me and we'll get on a call, okay? Jess, we bought our first single family rental in Pennsylvania with cash and a primary residence HELOC. Okay, fantastic. Our strategy is BRRRR. I love it. We're almost done with the maintenance and upgrades. What is the best way to prepare for cash out mortgage? Not sure if seasoning is required. This is a great question. You guys don't have an ability to turn on your camera. Wow, there's a lot of questions. Shit, I don't know if we're going to get through them. But what I will do, you guys, is I will take these questions if we don't get through them, because I want to talk about rates. I know you guys are interested in it, and I will post them to the community. Okay, I'll give you cred for the question, and I'll answer those. Okay, so please go get on our. If you're not on the community, get on the community. Let's go. Where was it? Who just asked that? Jess. So cash out refinance on the BRRRR method. This is such a good question because it's freaking complicated. If it's conventional, Fannie, Freddie, if that's the space that you're going to live in, it's a different answer if it was a non-QM or say DSCR product. But Fannie, Freddie, the rules are extremely explicit. If you paid cash for the property, the acquisition cost, both the purchase and rehab, very important. Both of those numbers must be present on the final closing disclosure, aka CD, when you purchase it. One of the common mistakes for investors' first BRRRR is they don't know that the total acquisition cost has to be listed on that final closing disclosure. So all we're going to see on there is the purchase price. And then they close on the property, and then the very next day, they spend $20,000 in rehab. That $20,000 was not on that final closing disclosure. So per the rules, you will only be eligible to get cash in hand, depending on the ARV, after repair value, and the loan to value max, let's call it 75%. So let's just do real numbers. Let's say that the purchase price was 50 grand and the renovation was 20. Okay, there's $70,000. The 50,000 is what's on that CD. The value of the property, the ARV comes in at 100 grand. It's a single family residence. I can give you 75% of 100. So your new loan amount is going to be 75,000. because the CD only had that 50 grand on it, you can't get that 20,000 extra. You cannot get that back because it wasn't listed on the CD until you've owned the property a full 12 months of ownership seasoning. Okay, make sure the total acquisition costs are listed on that final closing disclosure on the BRRRR method. And one of the ways that you protect yourself is ensuring that you're using an escrow company that will do what's called an escrow holdback. Okay, that way you're not dispersing a full $20,000 of repair to the general contractor, to the GC, in advance of them even beginning the work. Unless you have a real strong relationship with that general contractor, or maybe there's a JV, joint venture going on or something, I'm not going to release 20 grand to some contractor, especially out of state, before anything's even begun. So an escrow holdback, assuming that the escrow company will do this, most of them will, but ask the question, means that you will be able to, or they will be able to hold those $20,000 in escrow and disperse as you release them appropriately based on work that's been done. But so that way you've got the full 70 grand. I'm just keeping my numbers as the example. On that closing disclosure, the 20,000 of that 70 is going to be dispersed to the contractor at your discretion. And that way you've maximized, you haven't left money on the table, you've maximized what we can do on a cash out refinance. So that would be the first thing. The second thing about this, very, very important, is the acquisition costs have to be cash sourced and seasoned. So Jess, what you had said, so you used your own cash and you used a HELOC on your primary. As long as you're the one getting the loan and you're the one on the HELOC, those are your source and seasoned funds, no limitation. If you use leverage to acquire the property, somebody else's money, let's say that you got a hard money loan to help you acquire and get some of those rehab dollars, you cannot get any cash in hand, no cash back to you until you've owned the property 12 months. You can do a rate and term refinance, and people get confused by this. If you use leverage to the BRRRR, right, that we're still talking about BRRRR, if you use some kind of leverage to acquire that property, bridge loan, short-term money loan, okay, and all you care about is in the refinance, that 30-year fixed mortgage that we're going to get to replace that short-term mortgage, all you care about is paying off the existing lien plus the new closing cost with the refinance. That is called a rate and term refinance. You will not get cash back in your pocket. No seasoning is required in that case. There's more nuance to this, but I'm going to shut up for a minute and get into the interest rates. Let me see. Hi, Jeff Colgate, owner occupied. So guys, I promise you, I will get to these questions. We're running out of time, and I know that everybody's busy. So let's take a minute and talk about interest rates. I did take a second beforehand. I wrote it down. 11 a.m. is when we're going to find out if the Fed, if Mr. Jerome Powell and in all of his wisdom and his cohorts are going to reduce the Fed fund rate by a quarter or by a half. Let me preface really quickly. End of July, Jerome, I think they were in Jackson Hole, made his statement or announcement to say that the time has come, that basically that the Fed fund rate is going to be reducing. The language of the end of July's speech was enough for secondary markets, Wall Street, regarding mortgage-backed securities, et cetera, to make the moves in advance. The expectation based on the temperature that Jerome kind of put out there was that the Fed fund rate would reduce by 1/4 percentage point. So from July to now, the rates that we're seeing already have that expectation built in there. So if by 11 o'clock today, the Fed says that the Fed fund rate has reduced by 1/4 percentage point, you're not going to see much difference in interest rates. It's not going to change all that much. There may be some initial knee jerk and some movement up or down. It could go either way. But unless that announcement says 1/2 point, it's not going to be more. I'll give you my opinion in a second. But if they come back and say, because some people are saying that they're going to reduce by 1/2 point, then we're going to see rates come down further immediately. Okay. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to see the 1/4 point. I've actually got a bet. I wonder if they're on this call. I've got a bet with one of my clients for lunch about what's going to happen. They're doing a loan with us right now. And I'm thinking we should have locked, because I think that the announcement's going to keep it at that 1/4 point that's already been built into the secondary markets. They think it's going to be a half. Loser's going to pick up lunch. So we'll see what happens. I'll let you guys know. So the 1/4 point rates are going to stay the same. If they come down that half, they're going to go lower. The reason I don't think that they're going to do the half is that inflation's on the run. And what I'm reading says that the Fed is not as focused on the inflationary metric anymore, the CPI and the PCE, Consumer Price Index, and their favorite measure is expenditures. I don't know why I can't lock this into my brain. CPE, whatever, it'll come back to me. I'm old. They're not looking at that as much. They obviously see that we continue to be moving down that road, that it's getting lower and lower. Now they're concerned with the employment, or unemployment rather, metric. So the first Friday of every month, the employment or the jobs report comes out. The expectation for the prior month was that we would see 160-ish thousand jobs created. It came in at 140 or 142, something like that. So it actually came in lower. That's good for rates ultimately, but it wasn't a big enough spread in my mind that I feel like it was going to justify the Feds to take that kind of quarter point expectation and go a full half a point. Now, there's probably other, microeconomics in there that I'm not even familiar with that could be moving the needle one way or the other. But in addition to what I just said, the Fed's rates come down so much slower than they go up. And I think they've been uber conservative overall. So I don't see them making the first rate cut in 2 years more than that quarter point. I mean, they've got plenty of time throughout 2024. I think we'll continue to see rate cuts this year, but this first one, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I'm right. We got about an hour left before that announcement. So let's just take a peek. If you're locking today based on the following criteria, remember, if you haven't heard me talk about this, there's something called an LLPA, loan level price adjustment, a positive or a negative number that associates with the characteristics of the loan transaction. Loan size, loan to value, purchase versus refi, single family versus 2 to 4, credit score. All of these things are going to dictate what the interest rate you're quoted is going to be. So based on the following, I've got some data for you. A purchase, $200,000 purchase price, single family residence, 75% LTV, 760 or better credit. I think that's enough criteria. If we were locking today, you'd be at about 6.375 with 2 points. The cool thing, though, that I wanted to leave you guys with in the rate sector is that for the first time in a while, we're starting to see something called premium pricing. You guys are probably, anybody that's gotten a loan in the last couple of years has known you're not getting any investment property loan without paying something in points, because there hasn't been premium pricing. And the reason for that is secondary markets know that as soon as rates come down, and they'll come down, right? Rates are not a straight line. They go up, they go down. As soon as they come down, the loans that originated prior are going to start paying off, meaning they're going to be refinancing. The servicing rights that were paid for are going to start taking losses. So they have to hedge in that way. So they're collecting points up front to cover the losses they're going to be taking when the mortgages that were secured here start paying off in advance of them being profitable. Okay, that's an easy way to explain it. Now that interest rates are coming back down, we're starting to see more premium pricing where you guys get to choose if you're going to want to pay points or not, right? And I won't get into when it's appropriate to pay points and when it isn't. We'll save that for another time. But I am starting to see, in addition to, I'm hoping that you guys that are listening, 6.375 on a 30-year fixed mortgage is, hello, yay, oh my gosh, if you guys aren't dancing in your seat, you should be, for 2 points. But the final piece to that is that if you were to lock at 7.375, you would not be paying points. That's premium pricing. We're able to give you guys the option to say, with points, without points, we'll do the math together. Just make sure that you ask us. And we'll ask some questions about what your goals are for the property and that loan potentially. Is it in an appreciating area? Are we going to be refinancing in a couple of years, et cetera, et cetera? So yeah, that's really good news. I've been very excited to see that premium pricing is more available now than it has been in what I feel like is a very long time. So okay, you guys, it's a little bit after 10. This is recorded. I figured that out. It's being recorded. So we'll post this on our YouTube channel. I think that we'll be able to get it on our community. So be looking for that, and I will get to these questions. It may take me a couple of days. There's quite a few, which I love. Thank you. Thank you for participating. We're going to be doing this again soon. Let us know your thoughts. What do you want to hear about? What do you guys want to talk about? We'll make sure that we cover all that stuff. You can put it in the community. You can email me directly if you have that email. Otherwise, I'm going to see you soon. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And we are on standby. Whatever you guys need, call us, email us. You know how to reach us by now. Looking forward to working with you. See you soon. Bye, guys.